Hi, welcome back to Zartman Rigging. In today's video, we are going to do a covered eye splice. We're going to make an eye splice in a Dyneema cord rope that has a polyester cover on it. This rope is used most commonly for boat halyards, for sheets, for things like that. I am using it for the knotless anchor extenders that I have just had UIAA rated and are for sale on my web store for rock climbing purposes. I have a 12-footer, I have an 8-footer. I've color coded them red and blue. And the directions for this covered eye splice can be found in my book, Modern Splicing, which, as well as the tools necessary to do the splice, can be found also on my web store over at Zartman Cruising. So check that out when you have time. But for now, we're going to begin our splice. What I have done here is I have a pre-cut length of the rope that I use for the anchor extender. This is one of the 12-footers, and I've put an eye in one end, and now I'm going to splice the eye in the other end. Here's the finished eye. Here's the bare end with no eye in it. And if you see, if I slide the cover back, you can see a core, a Dyneema core. It's a 12 carrier core with a 32, maybe this is a 24 plate polyester cover over it. So nothing fancy, your run-of-the-mill polyester covered Dyneema rope. This comes from Marlow Ropes. They're one of the best rope makers that I work with. And so we are going to put this splice in it. Now, what I want to do first is, because the cover and the core can slide independently of each other, and ordinarily, I wouldn't want all of this cover sliding back down 200 feet of rope or however much I'm splicing. I'm going to tie a stopper knot in it. So I'm going to measure out a fathom, maybe a fathom and 3/4, and I'm going to, I did it already because I wanted to mark my spot for filming purposes, just tie a regular old figure-8 sort of overhand thing there. And very importantly, I'm going to put this drift in it so that when I pull on it, if I have to pull on it really hard, the knot will not seize up. So no matter how hard I pull on this knot, when I pull the drift out, there will be enough slack there for me to be able to get this out. So the drift is an important part of my splicing technique. Some people will wind the rope around a winch that they have on a bench. Some people will put a very thin fid in it. Sometimes they put a thicker fid, which then is longer, and they've got this huge thing clattering around and beating up their bench because they're using the metal fids, these aluminum tube fids or whatever. So I like to use the soft wooden, it's hard wood, but it won't bang your bench up. It won't scratch it up. It's a nice little drift, and it's part of one of my splicing kit sets. So I've tied my stopper knot there, and I'm going to stop talking about that for now. I'm going to go back to the business end of my line. And the first thing I need to do is, because there's thickener is a word I just made up. This is thicker than this because there's a lot more material in there. I need to make sure that this has enough slack in it to go over this. So I'm going to make what is called cheat. And to cheat, I'm going to slide this over, and I know from experience that this rope requires about 3 inches of cheat. So I'm going to take my ruler, and I'm going to measure 3 inches of slid back cover. Okay? Now I'm going to hold that right there, and I'm going to milk that cover slack back. Give it a few good hard milks. And now my cheat is hanging out over here. It can't go further than the knot, the stopper knot, but I want it all out of where I'm working right this moment. So I'm going to just milk it back. There it is. Now, the next thing I need to do is I need to measure the berry. This splice has I guess it's probably 4.5 millimeter core. So I determined earlier that 18 inches or 1.5 feet was the amount of berry I needed. I could do that on my little bench ruler, but so you guys can all see it, I'm going to put this ruler here, And I'm going to measure, there's a foot, there's a 1.5 feet. This is now the length of my berry. I'm going to put one wrap of this elegant, so good looking tape around it. Well, maybe a couple wraps, because I find with this tape that I hate cutting my name in half. So I may have to get a different sort of tape, maybe with the name of my enemies on it. And then I won't mind hacking that all up. In the meantime, I'm using bigger lengths sometimes than I wish. Okay, but I'm going to put that tape there. And so now, from this edge of the tape, this edge here, to here, is that 18 inches of berry that I wanted. I'm going to measure my eye in a little bit, but first of all, I have to do a thing. I have to take this core out of this cover and then bury a little bit of the cover back into the core so that I have a smooth transition into the splice. So I'm going to bunch it up, and the tape is keeping it from moving. I don't want to be too rough on this because the tape could slide if I didn't do it tight enough. So I'm just going to give myself a little bunch up, and maybe the width of a thumb be on the tape. I'm going to dive into the cover with my titanium picker fit. Dig the cover apart. Once I've got the fit in, I can kind of fold the rope and just push the cover strands aside. Maybe I can push them aside and then put my thumb on those and then go to the other side. What I want to make sure that I do, or that I don't do, is split any of those individual 24 yarns. I'd rather keep all those yarns kind of each bundle with itself and go between the bundles. So now you see it's starting to kind of come out of there. And here it comes. And this, with very tight rope covers, can just take you forever and make your hands super sore. This is a nice loose cover. It's not hard to do. So now what I have is I have a flap. We call this a flap. I have the core, the splice tail, or the berry, and I have a little bit of material, just normal rope past that tape. That's all good. That's how I want it. Now what I want to do is I want to cut a little flap to bury into here. And I'm going to cut 4 inches because I have written all of my measurements down, and I know that a 4-inch flap buried in will fatten this up enough that I'll have a smooth taper, but will not get in my way later on. There's a science to this. With really big rope covers, you kind of want your flap to be shorter in relation because it's going to really fatten up your berry tail. But this, we're going to try it this way and see what happens. Now, from where the tail emerges, I'm going to put my thumb there, and right beyond the thumb, I'm going to pluck out, I don't know, 8 strands, a third of the volume. Let's see here. There we go. I don't want to pull too many or the entire thing just falls apart, but I want to pull enough that it makes a difference. And another thing I want to be careful of is to not pull so many that there's a step. I need this to be gradual, because if I have any steps in it, it's going to dog me later when I go to bury my splice. So there's a balance you have to strike between removing enough material to make your splice easy to pull in and not removing so much that something untoward happens to you later on. So I moved along another thumb width and started to pluck another set of strands. I hope you all can see that. And I'm not even going to go as many as 8. I'm going to go just these 4. I'm feeling 4-like today. Okay. Now I'm going to bury this into here with my standard pull fid. This pull fid, the standard pull fid, is the one I use the most. This pull fid does, I would say, nearly 80% of my rope splicing in the diameters up to maybe 3/8, maybe even a little more. And even some of the biggest ropes I splice, I wind up using this pull fid for various and sundry bits of it. So you see I pulled that in, and I'm going to push that back till my crossover is nice and tight. And I can milk this piece of cover down, Pull this a little tight, and then I should have a decently tight little crossover where the cover buries into the core. Now, before I do much else, I'm going to put a wrap of tape on that. And the reason for that is this cover has a curmudgeonly bad habit of backing itself out and making a little lump there right when you don't want it. And this, I mean, I'm only going to have this tape on here for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, but I find it very important. Some people put some lock stitching there, but I don't like to lock stitch because everything needs to be able to slide around a little, just kind of wiggle into place there, shimmy about, if you will. So now I'm going to take, I'm pulling this, see, against that tape, and I'm going to fan it out, and I'm going to cut it at an angle with my handy dandy ceramic knife. All right, look at that. So now I should have a nice tapered cover tail that is buried deep enough that it can never pull out of here once the splice is buried. It's going to be good, but does not have any shelves or sudden shelves or steps. Very smooth. So, and with every step, I'm trying to pull everything down as tight and as small as possible. The more you elongate it, the thinner it is. And so it's good to just try and get everything worked out smooth with every step you go. Now, for these, I have a 2-inch eye indicated. So I'm just going to bend this over and measure 2 inches from here to the end of the tape. Bearing point to end of tape, 2 inches. And I'm going to put my thumb there and pinch it. I could mark it. Some people mark it with tape. Some people mark it with marker. I'm just going to go ahead and dig my fit into it so soon that marking it is a step I don't need to do. What I want to do, though, so that I can get in there, is I want to bring a little bit of this cheat back. Happy little cheat. Let's fetch it back. And there we go. So now I've got a little cheat. Now I have a little bounciness there so that I can dig the fit in. And again, holding the spot with my thumb. Now I've marked it with my fingers so I can pick up the picker fid. I haven't decided what a good name for this is. I'm thinking picker fid, plucker fid. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions as to what to call it. Really, in most of the splicing kits you get that are a bunch of these fids of different sizes, it's just the smallest one. It's the 1/4-inch fid. But since it's the only of these sort of fids in the kits I sell, because I'm heavily pull fid oriented, kind of want a different name for it. Okay, so look, just like I did before, I dug into the cover, being very careful not to do the cover a whole lot of violence, and I have pulled out this little loop of rope. So here's my tail, here's my eye, here's a little loop of rope coming out. And I can bunch as much of this back against that knot as I want, and it is gonna not be any problem. Excuse me. Okay. So now I need to bury, oops, this along here. And I'm going to just work my picker fit in between the strands here so that the cover doesn't come up and mess with me. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that the cover slack over the eye is all the way out. So I'm going to milk that towards where this comes out. And then I'm going to go, oh, you know, past where that would come out a little bit. And I'm going to dive in to the core. Just bunch it up a little, scrunch it so there's some room. I'm going to dive in with my pull fid. And it's going to travel along the center. The nice thing about this coated core is that the individual strands want to stick together. It's hard to get this thing into the wrong spot because they all want to just be a unit. So we have 12 units here. And I'm going to come out of this on the same side as I'm going to fold this over. It's very important when you're doing these splices to just pay attention to not accidentally give this a whole twist around before you come out, or come out on the wrong side and then have to twist this to get to it. Those little details make a world of difference, not only in how the splice looks ultimately, but in how easy it is to bring that splice in. So I'm going to dive out right there. Boom. And I'm going to, I like to separate these just with my thumb. With these bigger ones than this, you sometimes need to push a fid in between the wires to get it open. This small one is thumb worthy. I'm going to comb these out a little bit, because then when I kind of put them back together, they're flatter and they go in here nicer, and they make a smaller bundle than if I was just in the middle of the big piece of string. So I've snagged the end. I'm pulling it in gently. I can rotate it to get it to wiggle in, but I don't want to just go spinning around. That's bad. Okay, so now the end has come out. Now that piece of tape is approaching that was keeping the cover flap and the berry tail together from making mischief. But now that this is approaching, I'm going to take it off of there. Its usefulness has been outlived. It's done its job well. But I need to keep pulling on this end and milking this, kind of scooching over until where the rope enters, or the berry tail enters, goes almost to that tape. Now, I don't need to have it exactly on the tape. I'm going to take this out now because it has also outlived its usefulness for the moment. If I milk my cover slack really tight, the tape and this are kind of at the same spot. That's what I want. I have a good bit of material disappearing into here. The crossover between the flap and the berry tail is down inside here somewhere, and that's good because we don't want it to show later on. We want it to bury nicely in there. So here it is, and what I like to do is I like to put it over the hook and milk this down nice and tight. And a trick, if it doesn't want to milk easily, or even if it does, forgive the noise, but a little bit of hammering, gentle hammering, kind of softens the strands and makes them move. Now don't worry, you cannot damage this rope by hammering on it. I have pounded on rope before on some curmudgeonly splices that wouldn't go in. It's not going to damage the rope. You're not going to break the strands. All you're doing is fanning them out and making them lie a little easier. So I've done that now. My crossover here, I don't know what you want to call it, is nice and thin. The thinner the better. And I'm going to put a piece of tape on that because I want this to not move for a while. I want this, as I bunch this up gently, to not scooch around. So there it is. Now I'm going to take this tail and I'm going to taper half of it. And so I just pull it out to there. You know, here's the middle mark. It's there, there's the center. We don't need to get any fancier than that. And at that very spot, I'm going to pluck 3 strands. This is 12 carrier. And so if I take 3 and 3 and 3, I will have a nice smooth taper that removes 1/4 of the material each time. 25% for those who don't understand fractions. Here's another 3. If I wanted to, I could take 2, 2, 2, and 2. Again, it's really dealer's choice how you want to do this. Sometimes you can lay them on your cutting board, the 3, and you cut them kind of at an angle like that, and then each one is a little longer than the last, and your taper is a little smoother. Now the last ones, the last bundle of 3, I put one to the side, I pull one up beyond the other, and I cut them both in the same spot relative to my fingers, and I have a nice smooth taper. The place where most splices break is at the end of the taper when people don't taper correctly. or taper finely enough. So it's very important to make your tapers really good. Now, I'm going to milk my body, my core, back over that berry, and look, there's a tiny little bit of that last bit of taper sticking out. I'm just going to suck that in. I'm going to pop that in with my pull fid. In real life, I have a variety of small bits of wire and tiny pull fids and things like that I can do this with. But I mean, I did this with this just fine. You don't need more than that. It's just that I have them lying around. And there's a lot of times when a smaller pull fid can be helpful, or something smaller even than the mini pull fid, and you got to go to the micro pull fid or even the nano pull fid. We might get into that in another video. But for now, I am milking this down. I want this to be as thin, as svelte, as lissom as possible. And sometimes you can hammer it to help it along. This is fine. I'm not going to hammer this one because it's pretty good. And so now I have my eye, got my tail buried all the way to here. And now I just have to bring this cover over all of this, and we have a covered eye splice. At first, it's easy. You just take and you milk the cover along, and it all kind of sucks in. But then there's a point at which you're trying to go up the ramp. And that's where you want to put your knot, which you wisely tied with a loop in it. I forgot to mention that earlier. I unwisely forgot to mention that earlier. And crave your pardon for that. We're going to put this over strong point off camera. The strong point is simply a hook in a bench that will not move. And now I'm going to milk the cover over the core by grabbing a handful of that slack, pulling it back, and I want to keep some tension on this so that this slides over it easy. If I didn't keep tension on this and this started to bunch up, it would eventually catch up with me, because the bunch would just move along and move along and move along and move along, and eventually at the hardest part I'd have a big old bunch of material. So I am making sure that I can pull on this as hard as I like. I'm making sure that I don't get any bunch here in the core. Okay, got another handful of that old slack. Here we go, pulling up and milking and pulling, and it's kind of going in, and things are getting a little tough. Look how tight that is. I don't know if you can see how tight that is, but the strategy here is to loosen up the strands by bending it. You kind of bend it back and forth, and that miraculously seems to loosen everything up, help it along. Sometimes, almost always, you can hammer on it with one of these soft hammers. And also, you'll notice that I'm getting close to this tape that was holding the throat, the base of the splice near the eye. I'm going to take that tape off in another 1/4 of an inch of milk, and I'm going to milk a little bit more. This is a slow process. Don't try to rush this. And now I'm going to take this tape off. So what I have here is this little loop is the material of the eye, and you can see that the cover over the eye is bunchy, and that's because everything is kind of bunching up as this moves back. The very last part to get buried is going to be this little loop, what's called the nubbin. But first I got to get there. So I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I'm going to give it another vigorous milk. Now here is where you will see whether you had enough cheat or not. Enough cheat will allow the splice to get buried more or less easily. Too much cheat will leave you a whole lot of slack after you bury it. Not enough cheat, and you will be struggling with this part. Okay, so look, I'm getting up to where this other piece of tape is, and rather than have the tape wind up, sliding around and getting caught inside of there, now's my chance to remove it. There are very few splices in the world where leaving a piece of tape in the splice is appropriate. It is certainly not appropriate in this one. So, tape comes off, and what I have now is here is where the tail goes into the core. I have 4 layers of material, maybe 1, 2, yes, all trying to fit inside of this cover, which is why I had to generate cheat earlier on in the whole circus. Okay, so I'm at the point where if I just pull here and milk here, this should go in. This is also the point where some people will put this on a winch and put it on a winch. I shouldn't say some people. I would as well if I was having trouble. But I'm not having trouble. If it was bigger rope or something like that, or it was a brand, some brands of rope are more difficult to splice than others just because the relation of cover to core is different. Sometimes the cover's thicker, and so then your core fattens up more when you stick that cover flap in it. Sometimes the cover is woven more tightly. Sometimes, oh, who knows? There's endless variations in rope. And so we riggers learn which rope we like to splice best. And that's sort of kind of rope we like to work with. My favorite rope in the entire world to splice is an Italian brand called Maffioli. They make the absolute best of every sort of rope. This Marlowe is also nice. And then the rope qualities, or not qualities, but spliceabilities seem to go down from there. Okay, so I have now buried my splice. I have this 2-inch eye, and I have a little bit of slack left over, and that's not the end of the world. The rope doesn't have to have a mega tight cover. I've only got, how much is that? Just a tiny little bag. What I could do is I could milk it up here and kind of hide it in the eye. And if this was a different sort of rope with a different purpose, I might put a whipping right here. But there's very little chance that this is ever going to pull back out. And so I'm not going to bother with a whipping. That is pretty much it. The Dyneema covered Eye Splice. Hope you enjoyed that.